And you know, whenever I'm giving examples of tests, people will say, well, Angela, if you don't have a test, you know, how will you know that they know how to read? This doesn't show that kids know how to read. You can not know how to read and guess the correct answers on these questions. Or the alternative, which is you can know how to read and get these answers wrong because they're designed to trip up kids. They're intended to trip up kids. And they're graded by temporary workers who have no education experience. They're Kelly services. They work for 10 hours. So that's who's grading these test scores. And my daughter, whenever they say, well, how will you know? And I say, you're not going to believe this. We have this strategy. Educators, we read with the children. We do it on a weekly basis. And you know what? When you listen to children read and you ask them questions, that, not this, but that tells you about their reading. Here we have an era of standards, and then we have an era of high-stakes testing. We have no returns on the investment, no positive outcomes for that, and President Obama is elected.
We laid out a few key criteria and said if you meet these tests, we'll reward you by helping you reform your schools. First, we encourage states to adopt more challenging standards that will actually prepare our kids for college and their careers. We also encourage schools to adopt better assessments to measure what our kids know and what they're able to do. We urge states to use cutting-edge data systems to track a child's progress throughout their academic career and to link that child's progress to their teachers so we know what's working and what's not working in the classroom.
Okay, a couple of things I want to direct your attention to. So we can reform your schools. I'm going to come back to that, but I want you to pay attention to that so that we can reform your schools and so that we can tell what's working and what's not working. So standards testing doesn't work, and the new administration comes along, and what do we get? More standards and more tests. Sometimes I ask myself, is this a joke? Because it feels like a joke, except without the funny part. What Race to the Top and Common Core Standards did were three things. The first thing is performance pay. And what performance pay does is it ties a teacher's pay salary and their compensation to test scores. Okay, so it didn't work to evaluate students based on test scores. So now we're going to evaluate teachers based on those test scores. It makes absolutely no sense. But again, it institutionalizes test scores. And not only does it not make more sense, but here we come back again. Is there science and research to support this? Is there science and research that supports best practices? And there was a study done by Vanderbilt College, and they took two groups of teachers, and it was a 2-year longitudinal study. And for the first group, they offered a $15,000 incentive for raising test scores. $15,000 incentive. That's, you know, it's significant. So, guess what? Made no difference. No correlation. Do you know why? Because the number one correlation to test scores is zip code. And teachers don't have any control over zip codes. And the other thing is, the assumption around performance pay is if you tie your compensation to test scores, that you'll want to do better on the test scores. And what they forget is that if we were motivated by money, if money was the incentive, we would be in the banking industry. This isn't the profession that we would be teaching. We're motivated by children. That's what motivates us. So performance pay is the big thing. Here's the other thing, and this just happened. Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, boy, things are just happening in our states, introduced what's called the GREAT Act. And the GREAT Act sets up an alternative teacher licensing and certification program. So that instead of educators, instead of having highly qualified, what we have is, not even close, through like the New Teacher Project or Teach for America. It's a revenue-generating nonprofit scheme that undermines colleges and universities. And it turns out these teachers in like a 6-week program, a 6 to 8 week program. And then here's the catch. This is the catch. It says we have strong accountability because if those teachers aren't performing on those tests, then we get rid of them. And it's perfect because they rotate them on a 2-year basis, and that way they get to avoid having to pay any kind of pension plans or like aging people have high health care expenses. So it's really a perfect design. Brings in lots of money, and it rotates non-teachers or these what I call interns in our neediest populations with our most at-risk students. So that's just what was introduced by the GREAT Act. So now not only do we have public neighborhood schools being shut down and replaced by these hedge funders, but now we have university and college development programs being eliminated and circumvented with these short training programs. The other thing that we got, in addition to performance pay, is the Common Core standards. Have you heard of Common Core standards? Okay, good, because they're in Wisconsin now. So those standards that teachers helped develop and teachers worked on, those were replaced by the Common Core standards. Do you know who funded the Common Core standards? It's the Billionaire Boys Club. Yeah, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Eli Broad. And what they did is they brought in their own education consultants and they drafted this set of standards. And now we have CEOs driving what is taught and learned in this country. And 37 states said, we think that's a good idea. 37 states signed on to the Common Core standards. And I'll read just one example to you. So by the end of the year, this is for grade 8, by the end of the year, read and comprehend literature, including stories, dramas, poems, at the high ends of grades 6 through 8 text complexity band, independently and proficiently. So essentially it's like, well, according to what? According to their measurement tools. Because once again, if you have new standards, you have to align all new curriculum and all new tests. And this is a big business industry. So what we get are more tests. And then we have these high stakes that are associated with them. Right now, teachers' salaries, whether or not they can pay their mortgage and pay for their kids' braces, is based on how well these kids do on these tests. Whether those schools get to stay open is based on, the stakes just keep getting higher and higher. And we saw just last week the report on the cheaters in Atlanta, the teachers that were cheating. And we know that cheating is wrong. We know that cheating is wrong. But what's really wrong is to take children with the fewest amount of resources and the least amount of opportunities and condemn them, and to use these measures to justify that. So, why is it? Why is it that we have a policy model that's not driven by research or science, that's not working, and yet we continue to perpetuate it? And I think, Diane Ravitch calls it the Ponzi scheme in education, and it's best understood in the words of Harold McGraw, who is the CEO of McGraw-Hill. The Federal No Child Left Behind Act, passed in 2001, continues to have significant impact on the education marketplace. Moreover, the Act's accountability provisions have created widespread opportunities for our testing and assessment offerings. See, we thought it was about children, and it's really about the education marketplace. And if you want to understand policy, That's the distinction. There are some people that are talking about policy in terms of education, and there are some people that are talking about it in terms of the education marketplace. We want opportunities for children. They want widespread opportunities for their testing and assessment offerings. Key to CTB's base business is the implementation and continued funding of NCLB's assessment and accountability provisions. Current federal budget allocates $390 million for state development and implementation of these requirements. Most states will supplement their allocations, and they do, to the tune of millions of dollars. So why 10% of the education profession has been cut? We're spending more money on data management systems, on more tests, and on new versions of the standards and all of the curriculum. And what's missing in terms of calculating the costs, Deborah Meyer, who wrote the foreword to my book, she says it most eloquently, and she says, it's the costs that are never calculated. It's the costs that are never calculated. So what are the costs of these misdirected policies? In financial dollars only, it's costing us $135 million annually to meet the requirements of NCLB, which is failing now 80% of American schools. We have a narrowed curriculum, cut electives, after-school programs have been eliminated. In many schools, music, art, and PE have been taken out. The support and intervention services that at-risk students rely on most have been diminished, in many cases cut completely. And recess. 60% of recess has been cut. We are mass producing at-risk children in this country. That's what this has led to, the mass production, the standardization of at-risk children. It is a model that is disrespectful to our kids. It is counter to everything we know about good teaching and learning. Tony's teaching a subject or a course on educating for human greatness by Lynn Stoddard. And that's a noble goal, educating for human greatness. And yet what's really driving our policy is the goal of educating for data comparison. And if you wonder why our dropout rates are increasing and why kids aren't engaged, it's because today's teaching and learning is not connecting with the real world and the real lives of our children. So the outcome of all of that is all of the promises that No Child Left Behind promised. Reducing graduation rates didn't happen. Narrowing the achievement gap, no, didn't happen during the time of No Child Left Behind. We had 9 million more children fall into poverty. College costs doubled in many cases. So from the time the NCLB was enacted in 2002 to 2011 today, in some cases college tuition has doubled. They should have titled it, Leave Every Child Behind, because that's what we've ended up with. And most important to note is today's college freshmen were NCLB's third graders. They have been through that entire reform movement, and they are showing up at college and need a 50% remediation. Those are the statistics, 50% remediation. And do you know why they need 50% of them need remediation? Because they were spending their time shading bubbles instead of reading and writing. That's why.